Yeah, so thanks for coming, Judy and Fred. I don't know if you've met Tim Zessen before, our the KP Law, our town council. Tim is the lead counsel for us for KP, and we have access to specialists in various other areas, but so this is a good chance for Tim to understand at least a couple of other players here in town on other committees or boards. Commissions. Yeah, so I'm sorry. So Judy Meisner and Fred Shanaya, should let you introduce yourselves. So over the last many months, we've talked about various issues relative to our personnel policies and inconsistencies between the personnel policies and good business practice, inconsistencies between the personnel policies or the implementation of personnel policies and the Town Meeting Act. Excuse me?
Town Manager.
Yeah, Town Manager. I'm sorry. Thanks.
Yeah.
No, thanks. That's why Tim's here. Thank you. So we've talked about a lot. Angus has put it into fairly concise format. Sort of an overview of the of what contributes to our personnel policies, and then some of the inconsistencies and how everything relates together. So I don't think I need to say a whole lot more, and instead maybe we can.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows the original outreach by the board was to the chairs of different boards, commissions that have, direct oversight of personnel in terms of day-to-day operations. So that includes, Concom, Planning Board, Library Board, Board of Health, Board of Water Commissioners. So and of course, public meeting, everyone is welcome, both from the boards and commissions and the public, but the goal was to really give the chairs of those boards and commission kind of a preview of what's happened and where the board and my office are going in terms of trying to finally kind of tackle this issue, which is so what I've done is put together a set of kind of a baseline of information, and let me do a screen share, Fred, so that you can see that too. So I'm going to try to keep this pretty succinct, but it is somewhat dense. There's a fair amount of information in here. You all have hard copy slides, and actually, you know what, Fred? I can forward you this in email. That way, you'll have it in front of you as well as up on the screen, so you'll be on equal footing with those here in the room.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so the purpose of tonight's meeting: personnel policies and administration. One of the select boards and the manager's top policy priorities for the current fiscal year is to update the town's personnel policies. With the adoption of the Town Manager Act in 2017, the underlying legal framework for the governance of the community changed, but the changes aren't yet fully reflected in other policy documents, including bylaws and policies. The primary goals for active personnel administration, kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, include fairness, consistency, and ensuring compliance with applicable laws, not just local policies, but state and federal labor laws. Existing personnel administration strives toward these goals as well, but all will benefit from the clarity that will result from updating town bylaws and policies as necessary to ensure internal consistency. So the goals of tonight's meeting is to provide an overview of the legal framework for personnel administration, overview of the current personnel administration framework, summary of the recent amendments to the personnel policy, and an overview of the anticipated personnel related work program and process for this fiscal year, including in particular a comprehensive review of and updates to the personnel policy, as well as a wage and job classification study, which is a grant-funded effort. So the legal framework for personnel administration, in summary, includes the Town Manager Act. We don't have a town charter, but this is the closest thing we have to it. The personnel policy, the town bylaws. There's a couple of different bylaws that specifically get into personnel issues. The select board policies, as well as town manager finance department procedures, which is things like what day to submit timesheets. It's not so much policy, it's more the administrative side of things, but it's part of the overall framework of personnel administration. Staff with roles in personnel administration include town manager. Under the statute, I have my office has broad duties and responsibilities, and I'm kind of a catch-all for anything that's not defined elsewhere. I kept that very brief because later in the slides I go into a little more detail on what some of those duties and responsibilities are. The town accountant business manager, Stephanie Frontera, who's here with us tonight, has a full-time plus job as town accountant, but she's got expanded responsibilities that were added before the job was posted that get into human resources. She takes the lead on the town's wellness programming, and she's got a very important role with payroll. And it's important to understand that, so that role is significantly expanded from the prior town accountant that had been, that position had existed for years. Stephanie's role is much more, even though she's got all of those responsibilities, she's got the additional responsibilities to do with HR. Treasurer collector, that position's primary responsibilities with regard to personnel are benefits administration, payroll, maintaining the personnel files, and she also supports my work on workers' comp or injured on duty claims, primarily in terms of files maintenance, but also some other things. And then the assistant to the town manager and finance department has a lead role in payroll, and including accruals, tracking, and that kind of thing, and record keeping. So it's basically the finance department. On several personnel issues, there's a very close interplay between the town manager and the select board. Some examples of this, the town manager is charged with the implementation of personnel policies, but those policies are enacted by the select board. The town manager or a negotiating committee is charged with negotiating collective bargaining contracts, but those contracts are subject to approval, ratification, and execution by the select board. The town manager is charged with proposing a departmental and organizational structure, but that departmental and organizational structure is subject to approval of the select board. The town manager is charged with recommending the salaries and pay rates for non-union employees, but those salaries and pay rates are subject to modification and approval by the select board. The town manager is charged with appointing and removal of department heads and other employees for which a method of selection is not provided in the Manager Act or by law. But those appointments or removals made by the manager are only effective after 15 days from the filing of notice with the board of the appointment or removal, or a waiver of the 15-day period. So the next few slides, I'm going to kind of skip through because what I just summarized kind of gets the highlights. So there's a lot of text in here, but there's excerpts of the Town Manager Act that elaborate in detail on duties and responsibilities in terms of personnel, supervision, administration. So that slide is intended to kind of a synopsis of that, just to not like go through all these words, but I think I really covered all of that. It does set out, in this section 4G of the Town Manager Act, it outlines some specific authorities and duties of the select board, and includes, all other non-personnel matters as provided by the town bylaws or provided in the general law. So the act kind of creates a, clearer division of labor between the board and the manager. But as I summarized initially, there's a very close interplay because basically just about any authority that the town manager's office has is subject to review or approval by the select board. So With that as background, I'm calling the next slide kind of unfinished business or loose ends. So this first bullet is a repeat of what was stated earlier, which is the adoption of the Town Manager Act, changed the underlying legal framework for the town governance, but those changes are not yet fully reflected in other policy documents, bylaws, and policies. Mike McCarron, actually some time ago, wrote a memo and included in his kind of description, the purpose of the Town Manager Act was to provide the authority to make the rules, policies, and directives for the management of the entire town. The process now is to implement changes to the personnel bylaw, the town bylaws, and the town policies to reflect this new authority. So he kind of described it as like the skeleton is in place, but it's got to be fleshed out. So in the absence of clearly written, or in some cases, any written policy, the board and the manager have established some regular procedures for certain aspects of personnel administration to ensure consistent administration. One example of that is revisions to job descriptions. There's nothing in the personnel policy that says anything about how job descriptions are revised, under whose authority, does it need a board vote, does it need a, so that's something that when that came up fairly early in my tenure, I brought to the board a proposed method of how we would handle that. The board agreed, and that's how we've handled it ever since, which is that the appointing authority can amend the job description. And so that differs depending on the appointing authority for different positions. Whether that ends up being where that policy ends up at the end of all this, who knows? But it's gotten us through for 3 years. We've been consistent. I think it's worked well. But the real point is there's nothing in policy that says a single word about that. And that's a pretty important point. Some more kind of loose ends. The town auditor in management letters over the course of 3 years has identified, in his words, confusion over what authority exists over the town departments and the appointed boards and committees. He referred to the lack of clarity regarding where various authorities rest, having created inefficiencies that continue to affect the town's operations in fiscal year 20. I expect a similar comment in the FY21 management letter. And the auditor recommended that the town evaluate a town charter in favor of the current legal framework for town operations, which includes the Town Manager Act, read in conjunction with various other applicable statutes, bylaws, and policies. If you just read the Town Manager Act, you'll get the framework, but until you read all these other bylaws, policies, you don't really get the big picture. So it's not easy to point to clear authority. So the topic of a town charter, I think, is somewhat beyond the scope of tonight's discussion, but it's been the subject of periodic board discussion since at least 2018. But timing and resource constraints, among other competing priorities, have prevented this from becoming a front burner issue. In the meantime, inefficiencies continue to affect regular operations, especially in the area of personnel. Understanding that any broader reconsideration of West Newbury's form of government is a longer-term matter and is not formally underway, an effort to update personnel policy is an important near-term step. I wanted to just, since we had people here, provide a summary of some of the recent amendments to the personnel policy that have been adopted in the past year or so. Until fairly recently, the board and the manager's objective had been to tackle the personnel policy comprehensively, recognizing that many aspects of the existing policy are either outdated, confusing, or incomplete. In other words, silent on key questions regarding personnel administration. More recently, the board and manager have chosen to address known issues or problems on more of a piecemeal basis, understanding that a more comprehensive approach will take time and resources. So examples of amendments approved this calendar year include an amendment back in the spring to section 5.4 on the topic of bereavement leave. The board approved broadening the number of relatives or loved ones for whom bereavement leave may be requested. More recently, the board voted over the summer to add Juneteenth as an official town holiday. More recently than that, there was approved revision to holiday pay for qualified part-time employees. There were also revisions to the recruitment and hiring section to add an internal hiring policy employment development and training revisions to section 4.3, and really more of a housekeeping revision to the affirmative action plan. The amendments to personnel policy include a public hearing with notice to employees at least 10 days prior to the select board vote. The recent amendments have taken into account employee feedback and have been generally well received. So looking ahead to remainder of FY22, and it may extend into next year, we'll see. It is going to be a process. The idea is comprehensive review of and updates to the personnel policy. That would include an initial review by General and Labor Counsel KP Law prior to becoming General Counsel in August. KP had been the town's Labor Counsel for the roughly 2.5 years prior to that. A process envisioned to include a series of staff and department head meetings with periodic reviews at select board meetings. Adoption of any amendments would be preceded, of course, by required hearing notices. And then there's this kind of a separate track, which is separate, but I wanted to just make note of it because it's definitely related. Kind of in parallel is the whole idea of wages and job classification. This has been something we've been talking about for a couple of years. We were successful just recently at receiving a community compact best practices grant from the Commonwealth. And that is going to fund development of a formal wage and classification plan that details at a minimum job descriptions, employee grades, salary ranges, and thereby providing the town with a tool to make pay decisions that are reasonable in comparison to similar work being carried out in all areas of town government. So each of those is a big effort, and those are going to be proceeding really in parallel.
So
Yeah.
Angus, this review, are they gonna just say, okay, we think you should look at A, B, and C, or is it going to be, so then we have to come up with A, B, and C, or are they gonna actually help draft some A, B, and C? If I'm not
In terms of the
say,
wages and
like say, we think you should, I don't know, we think you should compare the wages of the different positions with similar sized towns in Essex County. We think you should do it, or are they gonna actually help us do it?
So,
You know what I mean?
yeah, well, it has everything to do with how we scope the work. We haven't engaged a vendor yet. We just got the notice of having received the grant. I think it was like a week ago today.
Right,
so-
but so what did the grant?
Well, the
say?
grant, this language here is right from the grant.
Okay, but it's pretty, yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah, now it's
governmental, it's pretty
Yeah.
vague.
So as you know, we participated in kind of a regional comparative wage study with the town of Merrimack that they undertook. We were one of the comps in their study, so we provided them a lot of data. So in my opinion, I don't think we need to redo that. We have like
Okay, well,
very
that was just
recent
a-
data,
That was just a
but that's
for
going to be an important input. I think there's a lot of things, here within our own organization that because of this decentralized kind of oversight or management of personnel over the course of many, many years or decades, I think different sections of the organization have either advanced or not advanced in terms of pay and responsibilities, not in a linear way. Some have advanced more or less than others, I think, because of kind of decentralized oversight. So I think part of what I would see as an objective for this would be to help kind of level set our people getting comparable pay for comparable work, notwithstanding whether they work in this, that, or the other area of the organization.
Okay, so, but again, is this something the town is going to do, or is this
No, we're
something
gonna-
like we're
yeah.
actually gonna get some help?
No, we're going to hire a vendor. Yeah.
with the grant.
With the grant. Yeah, it's a
But
$15,000
they're just
grant.
gonna say, but my point is, they're gonna say, we think you should look at this, or they're actually gonna say, give us suggestions on actually what to do.
No, we need
That's
suggestions,
the
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
They'll fill in the blanks.
Okay,
Yeah, they'll give you firm numbers and they'll do a study similar to what Merrimack did, with similar sized communities. Yeah, they would do that. I mean,
Okay.
it doesn't really help to say, yeah, you should fix
We
your.
can ask the questions ourselves.
Yeah, well, right, but there are also things we've discussed, and the board's discussed with regard to responsibility relative to capacity in different departments. So for instance, we have a couple of functions right now that are kind of housed in my office, which, objectively, we really don't have the manpower to do. We do, and we keep doing it week in and week out, but so some examples of that would be, HR is a big time issue. It affects our time hugely. A second would be grants administration. In FY21, we administered, I believe it was 32 grants in the fiscal year. There's not a grants administrator. So, myself, Stephanie, and Jenny in particular are that's an enormous time impact that affects us, week in and week out. A third one is procurement and purchasing. With Mike McCarron's retirement, we've assigned.
Again, okay,
Yeah.
so my question would be, would they say, we think this would improve things a lot if you manage grants by moving it here or having someone else do it or divvying it up? Would they actually get into the nuts and bolts of
Yes.
what to do?
Yeah, I mean, in my
That's
experience,
what we need.
it is what we need. Yeah, and I think in my experience hiring vendors, it's so important to scope the work properly, to get them off on the right foot, meaning have them build on everything we already know. Like, we have a lot of information, we have a lot of insights and ideas. We just don't have the time. I mean, Stephanie and I might put our heads together, or me and Jenny or Caitlin, or, we might put our heads together and have some good ideas, but then we're on to the next fire and on to the next crisis and on to the next work product. So we don't have time day in, day out, week in, week out to drill down and push these forward. So, I think, I've hired a lot of consultants over the years, and you need to scope it properly. You need to be really clear on what your expectations are before you sign the contract,
Right.
clear on what the deliverables are, and then populate, give them the input so they aren't starting at letter A. Hopefully they're starting at letter N or O, so that they're like, a good part of the way there before they even really. Oh, so Judy just asked a question of how many communities did Merrimack include in their study? I'd be guessing, but I think it was about 12 to 15.
Yeah, 12 to 13.
Yeah, I gotta verify this with Carol, because Carol McLeod's you got to know Carol. Because when we sent the data to the vendor, they said we would get a copy of the final report. And that was kind of their enticement to get us to, because it took hours, because one of the things, there's no, you can't generalize on anything with personnel in West Newbury. Everything's different. And when you're really taking into account, who's got a phone stipend, who has a vehicle stipend, we've done away with a lot of those things since I've been here, because I would much rather just roll it up into salary so you have a clear picture. But that's not how it's been done. So to provide that data was actually quite time intensive. And so part of what the vendor said is, when we're done with the study, you'll get a copy of the study. Well, the vendor never followed through with us. But I contacted Carol and kept contacting her, and she eventually sent it to me, but she said it's draft, it's still marked draft. So I haven't broadly circulated it, because I still don't know it to be final. At this point, I mean, that was probably back in, probably May. So it's probably final, but I haven't ever got, and I found there was a material error in there with regard to dispatch. We were looking at the wages, and it just didn't look right. And sure enough, we pulled the dispatch contract in a neighboring town, and they had the numbers wrong. So that kind of left us feeling like, oh, we don't really want to bank on these numbers. So I would like to get something marked final. Anyway, but it was about a dozen or 15, probably a dozen. And there's a lot of good data, but it's not it's not how I would have scoped the work, because all it gives you is hourly rate. It doesn't give you how many hours per week is that position funded. So you're not looking apples to apples in terms of like a conservation agent. It gives you grades. I think that was in there, but it doesn't say if it's a 20-hour a week or a 40-hour a week position. And it doesn't help you understand, is there an admin to support that position or not? Like, those are the more qualitative questions that we have in my office. And as we look at, other towns in terms of finance administration and towns that have, deputy treasurer collector, assistant town accountant, assistant town manager, these kinds of things, like, it sure looks like they have a lot more capacity, but without really drilling down and calling each of those communities and say, is that just one person with multiple titles, or is that in fact a separate employee? How many hours a week are they?
Also, the question is, what are the job responsibilities of,
Right.
the same title could handle a really wide range of responsibilities.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, I think we heard of one where the in one community that the assessor is the purchasing officer, and I'm sure that works for them, but that's like a very kind of unusual thing. So yeah, it's not that helpful. Like, the data is something, but without doing that deeper dive, it's not that helpful. Because we have to do the deeper dive. So, so again, we just got this grant. We just got it a week ago. We haven't even executed the contract with the Commonwealth. We just got the notice of award. And in dealing with, it's sometimes months. I mean, we still, we got that earmarked for the safety audit for the Page Pipestave intersection in July. I've been in contact with the state office every couple of weeks since July. We still don't have an executed contract. And it says right in there, we can't begin work till we have an executed contract. We got to get it done by the end of June. Like, it takes so we got the grant award. We don't have the grant, contract. And so once we have that, we're going to need to scope it out, shop it around to vendors, get someone hired, and get the work started. So it's not like we can just start tomorrow. So I think I'm down to like the last two slides. So some of the initial areas of focus include, and this was all outlined in the initial outreach the board had sent, modifications of job descriptions or duties, hiring practices, changes in employee wages or grade level, tracking and approval of accrued time off, department office hours and employee work schedules, and performance evaluations. Those are a handful of areas where I definitely think progress has been made in every one of those, but there is still either a lack of consistency or a lack of clarity when you look at how different of these, areas are managed over the whole organization. So I just wanted to finish by restating kind of the overarching goals of the overall effort, which is, fairness, consistency, and ensuring compliance with applicable laws. Making sure that all employees are treated fairly and consistently is the ultimate objective for the policy updates, and of course is an important factor in employee morale and effective staff management. So clarifying the authorities, policies, and procedures will benefit the employees. It'll improve the organization's overall efficiency and ultimately benefit the town's taxpayers and governance. So that was all background. That's kind of all I have to say, but I wanted to kind of tee things up. And then, frankly, we'd hoped we'd have a couple more people here, but that's okay. But so that's discussion. So you guys have at it. Judy, Fred, floor is yours.
Well, I think that they're all good ideas, and I think that consistency is important. Also, is there anything that you want the personnel committee?
I think the personnel committee could have an important role. The only, as you know, because you and I were at those meetings together. When I started, I was told, the committee hadn't met for 3 or 4 years. And I knew based on what I inherited and the lack of clarity that, and knowing how crowded the select board agenda was, because it was maybe not quite as crowded, but it was really actually just every bit as crowded because we were dealing with the school override and hiring a police chief and bicentennial, and I mean, it was 100 things. So I felt like it would be really important to have a different entity that wasn't pulled in 100 directions, that could drill down and focus on personnel. But the issues became bandwidth issues on my part because there's no dedicated staff support. So the committee's ability to have an effective meeting relied on my ability to kind of tee up the issues, which I did, put in a significant effort to do that. But then we'd kind of we'd have a meeting and nothing really, other than, we made some efforts on the job description thing, but nothing really tangible came out of it. And there's just, only so many hours in the day. So I think if we, kind of engage the personnel committee or get it like built up again, it needs some more support. Now, at that time, Stephanie hadn't been hired. The former town accountant really didn't have any responsibility for HR. I know Stephanie would be willing to support the committee, but there are major bandwidth issues. Stephanie works way too many hours right now. So that is an issue. I think that as a venue to like pre-screen or preview potential amendments before they get to the televised select board meeting could be really helpful. But I also think, like I said in the slides, I think a process, my primary audience is the staff, because they're the ones who work here. They're subject to the policies, they're affected by them. And that's always been my approach throughout my career, is to try to, engage staff. So I think that, having a lot of evening meetings is not only not helpful to staff, it's actually like freezing them out of the process. Because I know there's some people on staff who very much want to be part of it. So I think daytime meetings when people are working is going to be really important. So I think there's, there could be a role, but it would have to be kind of defined. Because that's another example, that bylaw hasn't been amended. So the way it's written, doesn't reflect the change in the form of government. So it's, there's some inconsistency there. But the other issue with the personnel committee is it's been very hard to retain members. So I think if we had, one or more people out in the community, who are engaged in HR and personnel issues, that would be a great resource. But, the one person we had who I thought had a lot of promise there, I wish I had a couple and they both had to step down for different reasons. So. But even, one of the people who, worked in that field said at a couple of the meetings, like, I hear what you're saying, but we're just a volunteer committee. We can't solve these problems. Like, we don't have the time to solve these problems. I'm like, I know. I mean, she heard everything I was saying, but she was like, this is like a huge amount of work. So, KP will help for sure. And, we're going to need their help. But it's a bandwidth issue, like it's the hours it takes.
So Angus, the consultant comes back with some recommendations. Then what happens?
Hold on a second. I just got a note from Tim that he is in the waiting room. So let me. That's the problem with this is
Who's that?
Tim Cronin. Yeah. So let me get out of the. Shoot. That's too bad. Tim?
Oop.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Angus, sorry about that. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry to keep you waiting. We had a PowerPoint up, and so it wasn't showing me the waiting room. So
Not a problem.
hopefully you weren't stranded too long, but it's we just went through some slides and we're now into discussion. So I'll email, I don't know if you have access to email, but I'll email you the
I
slides.
do. Thank you.
All right. So Archie, you were saying?
Okay, so I guess then what happens? So,
Well, with regard to the wage and classification or the personnel policy?
any of it,
So the personnel policy, the select board needs to vote any changes after public hearing.
so, but would there be things concrete enough that we could then turn around and put, in other words, put them into action? Okay, the consultant recommends that we do such and such related to the personnel policy. So would they frame it so that, or are we gonna have to then spend a lot of time putting those into something that can then be voted on? I guess that's.
No, I think with the personnel policy, the work product would be either redlined amendments to the existing policy,
Oh, okay,
or if we went in the direction of like a replacement policy, which that's a decision that would need to be made of whether you start with what you have and go through it line by line,
Okay.
or whether you say this thing's so incomplete and outdated and reflective of a different form of government. And, Tim said there's, references to federal law that are outdated. Like it's just a deeply flawed document. Myself, Stephanie, Caitlin, Jenny, Jim, Christine, Christian, every single new hire to Wayne, everyone who's come here has said, man, these personnel policies are terrible. Like anybody who's worked in another town is like, these are, and I'm like, I know. But it's not, you can't just fix them. But now we're trying to, we might want to start with a different, like a good template from some town that has good policies and then build in things we like about ours rather than trying to go through it line by line.
Okay, well, I was gonna ask Tim that, if are towns so different between themselves that what works in Wakefield, there's no way it would work in Melrose, that kind of thing, or are things transferable?
If you ask me, I think they're transferable. If you ask somebody from another town, their town is more special than everybody else's.
Okay.
But
With regard to personnel specifically, wouldn't you say it's more transfer? Like zoning is totally different.
yeah, you can't transfer any of it.
Right,
But
right.
personnel, I mean, 90% of there's an overlap for 95% of the jobs in town, and they all work similar schedules, and there may be minor discrepancies of regarding how much leave you offer your employees or other benefits, but those are fill in the blanks.
Okay.
The bones, the structure is largely the same. And when I look at the one you currently have, it's a fine start. I mean, it's not, there's some things that are savable, and then the biggest thing I think is missing parts, major sections that I would find from other bylaws and policies that we've reviewed that we could pretty easily cut and paste and make part of this and tweak it to West Newbury to make it.
Well, do you have some that you really like?
I mean, I don't have any of them memorized. I don't review them every day. But yeah, I mean, look, the more sophisticated towns have better policies, and those are a good place to start. Sometimes they're overkill because they have 500 employees instead of 50 or 100, but they're often a good place to start.
Okay.
So we should be looking.
That sounds like a better way to go.
We should be looking at towns that are well funded.
Andover, something Concord,
Yeah,
something
I
like
mean,
that.
Look, it's not. I'm not going to recreate the wheel. You can probably go on the internet and find Andover's personnel policies, and they're probably pretty good. I don't need to rewrite them.
Well, and within the community compact, which is the grant program that we got, they publish all of the grant funded work that they've done. And so that grant has funded over the course of the last several years, any number of communities who have updated their personnel policies. All of those are not only probably findable on the towns, those towns' websites, but it's all centralized under the community compact. They have, links to the wage and classification studies, the personnel policies. So there's no shortage of templates. And I think part of what's going to be needed to really kick off this effort is to take, the collective knowledge of those, who have worked with these policies most closely about either what the problems are or where it's just silent, where it's unclear, and kind of start with those. And some of those, like the qualified part-time holiday pay, that was great to get that fixed. And some employees are so happy that we finally did that because it was just such a problem for so many years. So there's no shortage of raw material. But we have some known issues we want to focus on. To me, the biggest issues are what it doesn't speak to. Things like job descriptions or things like, one thing that we, I had an experience when I first got here. Before I started, I worked with the board, and Joe Anderson was the liaison. And, for 5 months before I set foot here, we were in discussions, and there were things I said I'm going to need on day one to be effective. And one of those things is going to be a binder of every current job description. And so when I got here, there was a binder. Come to find out, half of them were either those jobs hadn't been filled in years, or they weren't the current job description. Because what we learned is, for example, the assessor said, "Oh, that's not my job. No, this is my job. My board voted it years ago." Or the town planner, "No, that's not my job. This is my job description." It's like, okay, so the front office in this town did not, and I'm not pointing fingers because I know you guys had no staff, but the front office didn't have a centralized record of what were the current job descriptions and what were the grade assignments. And there were disparities between the approved grade for some positions and what was on the job description that some other board had voted. It was, and in terms of the wage scale, and the ranges of low to high for a grade 4, a grade 5, a grade 6, and so forth, fully a quarter of non-union employees' actual wages when I began were either higher or lower than the stated range for their position. There was no centralized oversight of any of this. So, we've cleaned up a lot of those things, but we haven't cleaned up the policies. So
I'd like to add too, we're part of the Mass Municipal Human Resource listserv. Angus and I get stuff, and there's a lot of information out there. The issue that I struggle with, as Angus has stated several times, is bandwidth. But I have gone out there to grab different things that we're working on and see how other communities, their policies, some of them are out there. If not, there's people I can reach out to, which is all, if a question comes up, it's very helpful instead of trying to recreate everything from scratch.
Is there a template, or are there templates on the Mass Municipal Human Resources site?
I looked
for-
when I was researching
Yeah.
for the internal hire calls, and I couldn't find it. I don't know if you were able to.
So I have it's a separate, I want to say it's a Dropbox account, and there's all stuff that members save into that I have access to. I have to look around. There's a lot of information out there. I also have the ability to send emails out to the whole listserv, so it goes to every single community that is involved, which most communities, everyone has someone on staff that's in that particular group.
Well, this is Fred. I think this effort's great. I think sharpening up things is the way to go, especially if there are inequities in the system as to pay and pay grades. That's something you really don't want to have exist if you can, if there's not a clear rationale for doing so, and generally it's not, it's a historical artifact. But I would just, having written a lot of federal regulations in my life, I think you need to be judicious, might be the word, maybe cautious, but I think judicious in terms of how much input you get from every town in Massachusetts. You know, you can get buried in trying to sort through that. I think that picking, you know, I would rely on the law firm expertise to say, look, we know that 5 towns have gone through this effort, and let's start with those templates and see where they overlap, where they don't. It's just an observation that you can get further in that first step where you can get the framework and most of the guts in it fairly smoothly, and then you argue about, you know, where there have some issues come up. And of course, I do agree that anywhere where there's been a problem that has arisen within people's memory, that's also something that you need to create a list of those and start ticking those off to make sure you address that in the policy. That's my only comments on the discussion so far.
Thanks, Fred.
That's very good advice. So I think part of why it's been a little daunting to kind of undertake this, I mean, obviously, you know, the board sees how much goes on every week, and you know, it's been no different for, you know, years. So it's just, it's a bandwidth issue. But also part of it was we all recognized that undertaking this on a comprehensive basis inherently involves a lot of discussions, a lot of meetings, a lot of feedback loops among personnel, among boards and commissions. I don't know, you know, there might be union implications of some of what we look at because of how some of the union contracts are written, where if things are changed here, it automatically applies. There's a lot of moving parts. And so over the last few years, you know, at any given time, there's just been so much going on that, you know, the board and myself haven't felt it was the right time to really initiate that. But this fiscal year, I'm very glad that we are doing this because it's high time that we do it. And it's not been a lack of recognition of the issue. It's just, we didn't want to start it without having the bandwidth to see it through, because that's almost, in my view, that's almost like worse, because then you can lose credibility for when you do, you know, if you start and then it peters out because you get swamped on this, that, or the other thing. And then the next time everyone's like, oh, you know, you're not really serious. So that's part of why we wanted to have this kickoff, is just to kind of roll out. This is the plan going forward. And, you know, I don't know how much or how little different boards or commissions will be involved, but it's going to be a public process. They can be as involved as they want to be, but we didn't want to like really dig in until we kind of formally kicked things off and said, this is what the intent is, and this is what the objectives are. So that's the goal. That was tonight's goal.
Angus, it's Fred. Since I can't see the audience, I don't know what boards are missing from this discussion. Well, yeah, and
Really the main missing is, you know,
Where's the audience?
it'd be great to have Bob Janes here, you know, as chair of both Board of Health and Board of Water Commissioners. You know,
The assessor department.
yeah, Jen Policino, the chair of the Board of Assessors.
planning board.
We got Tim.
Tim, okay, yeah,
Yep.
Tim's here, right. Okay, well, I just think you might want to figure out how to contact the people who were not here and say, here's what we did. Let's, you know, sort of encourage them to get on board.
Send them a form.
Yep. Yeah, no, I definitely share the slides, and, you know, I think we'll end up setting up like a sub page on the website so we can start, because we have so many documents and we will have more as we go on. And I think having a central place that we can direct people to, including staff who want to keep current with when are the meetings, what are the changes under consideration. Because right now, for instance, with these, I don't know, 4 or 5 changes to the personnel policy approved just this calendar year, even staff who have been receiving hearing notices and receiving, follow-up after the vote to say, yes, this was voted, someone could be forgiven for losing track of that. Like they got their day jobs and it's, not every, it's, so once we start really moving forward, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to kind of track what's under consideration. And so, I think setting up like a sub page, on one of the websites and starting to populate that would be really good.
The
But
idea,
will it be, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say that, the idea of dropping in an entire new personnel policy is kind of a daunting idea because the number of transitions that would likely happen in one fell swoop. Like, I'm not saying it should be done, but it's a daunting concept. Because
it would definitely be incumbent, if that was the approach, it would be incumbent on the board and myself to make sure those changes are clearly articulated, because it's not fair to expect someone to go through line by line and look at it side by side. Part of what I was hoping we might get out of tonight or out of the initial part of this process is to try to gauge what level of investment or ownership do people have in these current policies? Because with some bylaws like zoning, people hold tight to those and they know exactly why they were voted and they know the history, and like there can be resistance to change because it was done for a reason and that's why we did it. And I don't get the sense, at least among staff, I think people hate these policies. Like, I don't think there's a lot of like love for like these personnel policies. So, and we'd like to have a similar meeting to this with staff, and just kind of, and we've been, I've been sending out updates, for a year now, like that this is something we're going to be working on. We're working, I give kind of periodic updates, but we haven't yet kind of kicked it off with like an all staff meeting or that kind of thing. But that would be a question I would ask is, are there parts of the existing policies that you really like, that you want to make sure don't get changed? And if we hear from people that they're like, we either don't like them or we don't really care, like, then it might be, it might be good to start with a clean slate and then take the things we do like and put it into a newer format. I was initially in the thinking of like line by line, but then the more I thought about it, like I don't know if people really have a lot of investment in the current policies. They had been kind of dormant for a while. There'd been some changes, but they were all kind of Frankenstein changes of like tacking on an appendix or, it's not like.
Like even the searchability of this, if you looked up sick leave or something, how searchable is this sort of this 3 appendixes, and is going to work?
Yeah. And
to comply with legal requirements. Right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, Archie, I think we can take a look. The stakeholders here can take a look at the various policies that are out there and see kind of what model people like best. Because like what you have currently is, it's a little clunky. There are better ways to do it. And I think, again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There's plenty of options out there that we can use as a model. Plug the relevant portions from West Newbury into that model, and then try to explain to people that the substantive changes, not just the stylistic changes, but what we're changing in substance. Because that's what people are going to care about. It's great that it looks nice and it's searchable and easy to read, but ultimately, if we change the vacation benefit, people should know about that without having to search through it line by line.
Yeah, this alone is just to lighten the mood for a second, this sentence is great. Accidents which injure people, so forth and so on, cause needless suffering and inconvenience. Accidents which injure people cause suffering and inconvenience. That's a great statement.
It's a good statement to live by.
I guess that's the truth.
You know, there will,
I'm not arguing with it.
there will definitely be, you know, some issues that will emerge that will be, you know, that'll be more front burner or, you know, potentially thorny kind of issues. But, you know, on the issue of vacation, you know, I've heard from a number of the new employees that have been hired in the last few years that our base vacation of 2 weeks is really kind of dated, and that a lot of municipalities, you know, it's 3 weeks, you know, for every position. And so, you know, right now we have had some offers that, you know, that the board's approved for 3 weeks, but that's still the policy is 2 weeks. But let's say the town made the decision that 3 weeks was a better amount of vacation. What about someone who's been here 20 years and it took them 10 years to get to 3 weeks? Like, how are they going to feel about that? Or to 5 years to get to 3 weeks? You know, so even something that would objectively be like conferring a greater benefit can still be expected to cause potentially some hard feelings of people who didn't get that benefit. And, you know, another thing that we know very well is going to be a tricky subject is the whole issue of the definition of full-time is a 40-hour-a-week position. And that goes back to when the town office's standard hours were 40 hours a week. That hasn't been the case since Mike Bertino was here. And so, you know, for some employees, we're working way more than 40 hours. Some employees are working, it depends if you pay for lunch or not pay for lunch, but maybe they're working 36, maybe they're working 38, depending on if you pay for lunch or not, which is not consistent. But the building's not open 40, but they're getting paid for 40, but they're salaried. You have other people who are hourly, who are 40, who are working 40. So there's inequities there. And that's not going to be that easy to fix. I think it's going to be easier now than it would have been a couple of years ago, because it just so happens there's been turnover in a lot of those positions. And I think people are going to be more amenable to like rethinking it. But, you know, my first couple of months on the job.
But
like,
just because it's there and there are some problems with it, doesn't mean we can't change.
right. No, it's all fixable. It's a matter of focus and I think, you know, I do think having the engagement of different boards and commissions with some personnel oversight is important. That's part of why this meeting was important.
The fact that there's such disparity between different positions is, you know, that's going to be, we talked about this before, that's still hard to adjust because, you know, benefits are sticky. You know, once you get a benefit, whatever that benefit happens to be, whether it's, you know, a lesser number of hours or whatever the benefit happens to be, you can't withdraw it. You know, it can't be reduced, and so how do we that becomes a parity issue. You know, having things parity between positions. Just one of the things we're going to have to face. We're going to deal with.
Is that fact that you can't withdraw received or?
Well, I don't think it's a fact, but it's it's a psychological fact. You know, it's yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply, sorry.
No, I don't know if there was a legal obligation for paying somebody.
No, nothing legally preventing you from doing that, but
From a morale standpoint.
morale, practically speaking, that reduce somebody from $25 an hour to 20. You're gonna last another week and then.
Right. Okay, but you know, it's a series of issues, and we need to face them and figure out how to make it as equitable as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, so you know, I think on the 40-hour issue, whether that's changing the office hours to 40 or reducing the budgeted hours? And if you do that, do you adjust someone's hourly rate so that they're made whole and they're still getting the same take-home pay? And how does that differ depending on if someone's salaried or hourly? You know, I think that's a solvable issue, but it's not going to be easy.
And that would have to fit in your new wage and.
Well, I think it kind of dovetails nicely with the wage and compensation, because I don't think there are a lot of overlap between the personnel policies and the wage structure, but there's some, and that would be one of them. The definition of full-time is you know, it's stated in the policy, but it plays out in how people are paid. So yeah, I think it's a nice kind of synergy to do the two in parallel. Is that what you were saying, or?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about adjusting the rate of compensation in relation to the hours, I think we'll have to still look at the wage and classification to make sure that you're still within the appropriate parameters.
Right. Yeah, I mean, another thing that's kind of weird about West Newbury, I've never seen it before, is every, you know, town or federal, I've worked for a couple of federal agencies, there's usually grades and steps. You've probably all seen grades and steps. This range, I've never seen that before. Maybe it's elsewhere, but
It's pretty uncommon.
yeah.
It's common in smaller towns. The larger towns have a step system, which has a built-in 1.5% to 2% step raise every year for the first 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
But then it's usually a step plus a COLA every year. So the overall raise ends up being about 4%.
Yeah, that's how it was in Marshfield and Westford. Grade and a step, or you get a step and COLA. And so the rate of appreciation of wages was much higher than it has been here with just COLA. So yeah, there's a lot to put on the table. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I guess one of the things we should do is try to get probably 2 or 3 different personnel policies from other communities that we have reason to believe are worth using as models, or maybe if you find the right one, maybe emulate almost completely. And Tim, I don't know if there are any, and I understand you don't know them off the top of your head, but if there are any you're aware of that you think are particularly worth looking at, that would be good to know, and we'll have to look for what other resources we can.
I can certainly do that. And it may not be a perfect fit, but just as a starting point, jumping off point, finding one that has the right structure, similar features as West Newbury, and then go.
Yeah.
I like the idea of starting fresh with because I feel like what we have now, keep trying to fix it.
Right. Like it's all written differently, like a different set of people wrote this, like this area, and another one wrote this one, and this one's in column format, and this one's labeled ABC, and the next one's labeled 123.2. It's so all over.
It grew organically.
Yeah.
Some people ate only organic meat, and other people were vegan.
Yeah, when I was looking at the other town personnel policies, I found like sections that were verbatim. So either they borrowed from us or we borrowed from them.
oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Huh.
I don't like the organization of it. It doesn't feel logical to me where sections are.
Well, and I absolutely hate that very first page that it's like bold and underlined. You're an employee at will. You can be terminated with or without cause. It's like, welcome to West Newbury. You know, I'm actually embarrassed giving this policy to new hires.
Make sure that.
Yeah.
No, but, you
No,
know,
it's terrible.
like underlined and in quotes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I started here, I actually like checked the law to see if that was correct, and it is, but you don't need to like
Yeah.
put too fine a point on it. Like, so good. Well, it sounds like there's kind of universal agreement that the policies need to be, you know, amended. And I think, you know, we got the right team now. You know, we got, you know, I think things have stabilized quite a bit with the various turnover, and, you know, we got a board that's very supportive of the effort, which is great. And so, yeah, we you know, got to roll up our sleeves and get Tim's office more engaged. We've been talking with him for, you know, probably what, 7 or 8 months, and actually probably more like 2.5 years off and on, but going back to probably early winter, you know, we started to scope out, flesh out like what needs to be done. You know, until more recently, we haven't had really the bandwidth to go much further than that. So, but now we got people focused on it, and that was a key part of the start to get things started.
So I guess when would you think the state would get back to you on when?
Well, so we got the grant, you know, I think they've been very responsive. That earmark is a different thing. That's because that's like a little, I just use that as an example.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll take long to get to an executed contract.
Okay.
And there are some on the wage and compensation, you know, there's some very, you know, reputable, well-known, like, I don't know, Tim, if you worked with the Collins Center out of UMass Boston, like I would have no hesitation. I mean, they're really good. They've done this work all over. They have a really good reputation. You know, I would probably want to shop it around and invite a couple of quotes, but I don't think it's going to be end of the earth search. There's a couple of known vendors who are very good, but getting the scope written tightly and making sure that deliverables are clear. You know, I'd love to have, you know, definitely have someone under contract, you know, prior to the holidays. You know, I don't know if it'll happen in November. It's possible. It depends what else comes along. So,
Angus, it's Fred. I think I know it's hard to pin down a timeline or a schedule, but it seems to me that one of the things that might help is even if you do a quarterly, like this quarter, we want to do the following, and then the next quarter, because if I was a staff, I mean, I'm thinking of the library and the library staff, and I think they would want to know, well, when are we going to get input if there are any changes that affect us? And so at least laying out just in rough terms and subject to change, some kind of process with some milestones, maybe that's the way to go, would be very helpful for people.
yeah, no, you're exactly right, Fred. That's very, very good. So yeah, we can do that. You know, we could do that for the meeting on, I mean, actually we've got it on for discussion Monday night, just as a follow-up to tonight's meeting. We have it on Monday's posted agenda. I don't know if we put it in ink, but probably in pencil, we could have and then a couple of weeks later. I totally agree with you, Fred, in terms of, you know, projects I've managed over the years. It's very helpful to everybody to kind of sketch out your general process, you know, and your milestones and where you hope to get to by certain dates. So that's a very important initial step to help keep people focused so it doesn't feel like this open-ended 2-year abyss. So that's a great point, Fred. In fact, we heard kind of a horror story earlier today from our treasurer collector who said that in the town of Groveland, with the former finance director, I guess they had a working group and spent 2 years working on updated personnel policies. And by the time they got them done, the board didn't approve them. Like they went through 2 years of effort. And I was telling Rick about this earlier today. And you know, there's a lot of elections in 2 years, and things can change, but they did all this work and then they were voted down. And
Yeah, no, and with a 5-person board, such as they have in 2 years, the majority of the numbers can easily change.
yeah. Yeah, so it's important to have a, a discrete process. I said 6 to 8 months. I think that's probably aggressive, but possible. It depends on what else comes along and what else we're trying to do in that time. On the wage and classification, with budget season right around the corner, it would be great to accelerate that. And it depends how quickly we can get someone engaged and how much time we can focus week in and week out. Right now we're doing a lot of different things. And I know in my office, we'd love to just be able to focus on some things and put in 6 to 8 hours a week on an issue instead of like 1 to 3 hours a week, because we're doing so many things. All right, any closing words?
I don't have a grand statement. I think we should, we should look for 2 or 3 models that we could use to work from, and that should be our starting point. And if there's anything we really value in what we currently have, see if it makes sense to integrate it into a new form.
Yeah, let's look at what we've got and like, okay, this, we can't do without this part, but the rest we can, and that would be
Right.
valuable.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to just throw the whole thing out without consideration, but probably most of it can be and should be replaced with something that is just, more logical sequencing and better thought out.
Good. Great. All right. Well, this is really helpful. And Tim, thanks for being here, because you're going to be a really important, we're going to need your help on all this. So
Angus, thanks to you for all the work you put in putting it together. I know you didn't have the time you would like to have had to.
Yeah, I would have loved to get this out a couple of days ago or a week ago, but it just,
Still, it's a really good synopsis of what we currently have and what some of the few strengths are and some of the many weaknesses and
Sure.
inconsistencies. So thanks for putting that all together.
sure. It's really important. Good. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
And find out if there's anything in there that any of the staff likes.
Maybe.
In fact, what are you gonna retain and what you're not gonna retain.
Yeah.
Might be helpful to find out if there's anything people like.
Yeah, no, I think actually that is something. Yeah, I'm going to send out something to all staff to say, because we had just sent out a note a couple of days ago that all the updated policies are now posted. Yeah, I think that's a great thing, is to ask, what do we like, what don't we?
Let people know you're talking about scrapping the whole thing and starting again. Is there anything in this
Yeah.
that you really like?
Yeah, yep.
Good point. Thanks.
Did you guys haven't adjourned? So that's why I'm not doing anything with Zoom until you guys adjourn.
Okay, I guess we never formally opened the meeting, did I?
You started talking.
Yeah, right.
I wasn't gonna be as stable as I wanted to.
With Steve,
I
sorry.
think we need to go back and restate it.
Exactly. Can you repeat all that? I need to.
Second.
All in favor?
Uh,
Thank you.